at the United Nations, his last speech as President of the United States, spoke one sentence about Israel and Palestine. He said the Palestinians must come to terms with their incitement for hatred and for violence in support of terrorism. And he said Israel must come to terms with settlement building and the occupation of almost 50 years. President Obama also made a remark that I think was in reference to Mexico, but could also be relevant for Israel and Palestine. And he said that nations that bring itself with walls imprison themselves. So this is perhaps common ground between Mexico and the United States and Israel and Palestine. We have a wall. We didn't get the Palestinians to pay for it, no. We paid for it ourselves. Prime Minister Netanyahu gave what I thought was the most genuine speech that he's ever given when he spoke about peace with the Palestinians. I, as you can imagine, have been a great critic of Prime Minister Netanyahu for many reasons. I've admired him for some things that he's done, and I've been very critical of him for what he hasn't done with regard to our Palestinian neighbors. But it seemed to me in this speech that Netanyahu was more sincere in calling on the Palestinians to both confront the incitement that President Obama spoke about, this sense that Palestinian leaders, the Palestinian political movement, encourage their own people not to accept Israel, not to recognize Israel, not to make peace with Israel, and to support violence. And at the same time, he stretched out his hand, once again, as he's done in the past, but it seemed to be more sincere than ever before, to the Palestinians and said to the Palestinian leader, President Abbas, I invite you to come to the Knesset to speak directly to the people of Israel. And I'm willing to come to Ramallah to speak in the Palestinian parliament to the Palestinian people. And he said once again, as he said in the past, that the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains two states for two people. President Abbas also spoke about peace. He spoke about the two-state solution. He said that the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, recognized Israel in 1993 when they signed the Oslo Agreement. And he continues to stand by the recognition of Israel. He spoke about the establishment of a Palestinian state in the June 1967 borders, living in coexistence with the state of Israel, as he said. But he also spoke about the historical wrong, from his point of view, of the Balfour Declaration, of the British government giving Palestine away to the Jews that was illegitimate, as he said, and unjust. Digging deep into the history of non-recognition, President Abbas had a complex message that the occupation since 1967 has to end, and a willingness to make peace, but also digging up the sense that the Palestinian people don't really recognize the Jewish people's right to a state of their own, and yet called on the Jews, on Israel, to recognize the Palestinians' right to a state of their own. These three speeches, the two in particular of Netanyahu and Abbas, point more to the complexity of the conflict and the failure to make peace that we've been engaged in for the past 22 years, more than anything else. This is not a simple issue because our demands from each other of mutual recognition of our right to a state is difficult to do. What state in the world demands from others to recognize their right to exist? States exist. Israel exists. The question is, why do we as Jews have this deep sense that we need to get their recognition of our right to exist, that our existence is just? It certainly comes from our history, from 2,000 years of persecution, certainly from the Holocaust, and this recognition that after the Holocaust, the creation of the Jewish state of Israel was an imperative. It had to happen. It was not only legitimate, the creation of Israel after all that we suffered was justice being done. But at the same time, we have to recognize that when our state was born, or when the first Zionists came to Palestine, there was another people there. They perhaps didn't call themselves another people. Palestinian identity as a separate national identity took decades to develop and to emerge to what it is today. It's a new people. It's a new identity. Identities are complex and they change over time, and perhaps 100 years ago, they didn't call themselves Palestinians, they were Arabs of Sham, of Syria. They were part of the Ottoman Empire, but there is no question today that there are millions of people in Palestine and around the world who call themselves Palestinian. Between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, there are two peoples in almost equal numbers. Almost an equal number of Jews and Palestinian Arabs living in this piece of land between the river and the sea. And for almost 50 years now, we have a binational, one-state reality. That's the reality on the ground. There's one state, Israel, between the river and the sea. There are two peoples. There's something called the Palestinian Authority, which, by the way, has been recognized as a state, the state of Palestine, by 135 countries, but not by Israel, not by the United States. These two states that exist between the river and the sea have no defined border between them. Can someone tell me the borders of the state of Israel? 70 years we have a state of Israel. Can someone define for me the borders of the state of Israel? I can't. We know we have a border on the Mediterranean. We have a border with Gaza, because Israel withdrew from Gaza. We have a border with Egypt in the Sinai. We have a border with Jordan. But we have a territory called Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, that has no clear defined border. Israel has not claimed sovereignty over the territory of the West Bank and Gaza. We have the city of Jerusalem, my city, the city that I love. No other place in the world that I would rather live than in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the most segregated city in the world. There are 350,000 Palestinian Arabs living in Jerusalem, in completely separate areas from where Israeli Jews live. There are no common areas where Jews, Israeli Jews, and Palestinian Arabs live in Jerusalem. The 350,000 Palestinian Arabs living in Jerusalem, most of them, more than 90% of them, don't hold Israeli citizenship. But Israel annexed East Jerusalem in 1967 and expanded the borders of East Jerusalem to include 26 Palestinian villages that were not part of Jerusalem, that are today part of the undivided, eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. 350,000 people who live in the undivided, eternal capital of the state of Israel, who don't have citizenship in the state of Israel, who have residency rights,